Jamal Johnson's first-class ticket meant nothing when a white businessman took his seat. As flight attendant Heather Wallace sided with the intruder, Jamal made one phone call. Minutes later, the entire plane shuddered to a halt. Nobody knew the 15-year-old boy owned the airline, until now. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice served at 30,000 feet, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever experienced someone underestimating you, and subscribe to catch more stories of unexpected comeuppance. Now, let's rewind to see how a brilliant young mind went from classroom genius to airline owner overnight. Jamal Johnson wasn't like most 15-year-old boys. While his classmates at South Chicago Public High spent their weekends playing video games or scrolling through social media, Jamal was busy revolutionizing the airline industry from his bedroom desk. At age 12, he had developed an AI algorithm that could predict and optimize flight patterns, fuel consumption, and crew scheduling with unprecedented accuracy. What began as a science fair project quickly caught the attention of tech insiders when his system outperformed industry-standard software by an astounding 37%. "I just wanted to solve a puzzle," Jamal would later tell Technology Today magazine. "My mom was always complaining about flight delays when she tried to visit my grandma in Atlanta. I figured there had to be a better way." His mother, Keisha Johnson, had raised him alone in their modest two-bedroom apartment after his father passed away when Jamal was just 4 years old. A dedicated hospital nurse working 12-hour shifts, Keisha often found her young son asleep at the kitchen table, surrounded by programming books borrowed from the public library. "I didn't understand half of what he was doing," Keisha admitted with a proud smile. "But I knew it was special. That boy taught himself coding before he was 10 years old. I just made sure he had a good meal and reminded him to sleep sometimes." Jamal's breakthrough came when he won the National Youth Technology Challenge at 13, catching the eye of venture capitalist Andre Williams. Impressed by not just the algorithm but the teenager's humble confidence, Williams invested an initial $2 million to help develop what would become SkyLogic, a comprehensive aviation management system. "I've met founders 3 times his age with half his vision," Williams told business reporters. "When you see that kind of talent, you don't question their birth certificate. You write the check." Within 18 months, major airlines were lining up to license SkyLogic's technology. When Aero Global, the third-largest airline in America, offered to acquire the company outright for $3.2 billion, Jamal became the youngest billionaire in American history. The deal included a controlling interest in the airline itself, though this detail was kept quiet at Jamal's request. Despite his extraordinary wealth, Jamal remained remarkably grounded. He insisted on staying in his regular public high school, maintained the same close group of friends, and continued living in the now paid-off home with his mother, though they had upgraded to a slightly larger house in a safer neighborhood. "Money changes your options, not who you are," was Jamal's personal philosophy, drilled into him by his practical-minded mother. He established a trust that would fund his education through graduate school and secure his family's future, with the remainder dedicated to philanthropy and business reinvestment. Managing his dual life wasn't easy. Weekdays were filled with normal teenage concerns, algebra tests, basketball practice, and the school newspaper. Weekends and evenings often involved video conferences with executives and business partners who were sometimes visibly surprised to see a teenager on their screen. He maintained a low profile, avoiding the flashy displays of wealth that might attract attention or change how classmates treated him. On this particular Friday in late May, Jamal was headed to San Francisco for the annual Tech Future Conference, where he was scheduled to give a presentation on AI applications in transportation. He had just finished his final exams that morning and had barely made it to O'Hare International Airport in time for his flight. As he stood in the priority boarding line with his modest backpack slung over one shoulder, dressed in jeans, sneakers, and a navy blue hoodie from his school's math team, no one would have guessed this unassuming teenager could buy the entire plane with pocket change. Just how he preferred it. Next stop, San Francisco, Jamal texted his mom as he handed his first-class ticket to the gate agent. "I'll call when I land." Little did he know that this routine flight would become anything but ordinary, forcing his two carefully separated worlds to collide in spectacular fashion. The boarding process began smoothly enough. Jamal handed his ticket to the gate agent, a middle-aged woman named Carol who barely glanced at him as she scanned his boarding pass and motioned him through. "Enjoy your flight," she said automatically, already looking past him to the next passenger. As Jamal made his way down the jetway, he mentally reviewed his presentation for the conference. The Future of Transportation panel would include executives from Tesla, Uber, and Boeing, all at least 3 decades his senior. He was used to being the youngest person in the room, but that didn't make it any less intimidating. Stepping onto the aircraft, Jamal nodded politely to the flight attendants greeting passengers. One of them, a woman with Heather Wallace on her name tag, did a slight double-take as he turned left toward the first-class cabin instead of right toward economy. Jamal had noticed these looks before, the subtle questioning, the momentary confusion. At 15, with his dark skin and casual clothes, he didn't fit the typical first-class passenger profile. Usually, a quick glance at his boarding pass resolved any unspoken questions. As he entered the first-class cabin, several passengers looked up briefly before returning to their pre-flight routines. A gray-haired woman in one seat pursed her lips slightly. A man in a business suit raised an eyebrow then shifted his gaze to his laptop. A couple in the center seats whispered something to each other, their eyes following Jamal as he moved down the aisle. When Jamal reached row 2, he stopped abruptly. A white man in his 50s was comfortably settled in seat 2A, Jamal's assigned seat. The man had already arranged his belongings, with a leather portfolio on the empty seat beside him and a glass of pre-departure champagne in his hand. "Excuse me, sir," Jamal said politely. "I think you might be in my seat." Maxwell Whitfield looked up, irritation flashing across his face at being disturbed. He wore an expensive suit with a gold watch peeking out from beneath his cuff, and his silver hair was perfectly coiffed. He assessed Jamal with a dismissive glance. "No, this is my seat," he replied curtly, not bothering to check his boarding pass. "I'm in 2A, Jamal explained, holding out his ticket. "Could you check your boarding pass, please?" Maxwell's expression hardened. "Look, kid, there's obviously been a mistake. I'm in first class. Why don't you double-check with the flight attendant? Your seat is probably in the back." A few nearby passengers were now watching the exchange with unconcealed interest. Jamal felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach, the same sensation he experienced whenever someone made assumptions based solely on his appearance. "Sir, my ticket clearly says 2A, Jamal persisted, keeping his voice level. "Could you please check your boarding pass?" Maxwell sighed dramatically and pulled his ticket from his jacket pocket, giving it a cursory glance. "Yes, as I said, I'm in the correct seat. Now, if you'll excuse me." Jamal leaned forward slightly to see the man's boarding pass. "Sir, your ticket says 2C. This is 2A. Is there a problem here?" Heather Wallace approached, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes as she addressed Jamal. "Yes, there seems to be a seating confusion," Jamal explained. "I'm assigned to 2A, but this gentleman is sitting there." Without checking either boarding pass, Heather turned to Maxwell. "Sir, is everything all right?" Maxwell adopted a long-suffering expression. "This young man seems confused about the seating arrangement. I've explained I'm in my correct seat." Heather turned back to Jamal, her smile tightening. "Let me see your boarding pass, please." Jamal handed it over, watching as she glanced at it briefly. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said, returning his boarding pass. "Perhaps you misread the seat assignment. Let me find you a seat in economy class." "But my ticket clearly says first class, seat 2A, Jamal protested, keeping his voice calm despite his rising frustration. Maxwell made a show of checking his watch. "We're delaying the flight," he said pointedly. "I'm sure there are plenty of seats in the main cabin." Heather placed a hand lightly on Jamal's shoulder, attempting to steer him away. "Come with me, and we'll sort this out." Could you please check his boarding pass too? Jamal requested, standing his ground. A flicker of annoyance crossed Heather's face. Sir, I need you to come with me now. We're delaying the boarding process. From the row behind, a woman whispered audibly to her companion, how did he even get a first-class ticket anyway? Another passenger muttered something about, kids these days expecting special treatment. Maxwell's expression grew smug as he took another sip of champagne. Perhaps there's been some confusion about how you obtained this ticket, he suggested, his implication clear in his tone. The accusation hung in the air. Did he think Jamal had stolen the ticket? Or used someone else's? The racial undertones were unmistakable. Jamal felt his face grow warm as multiple pairs of eyes fixed on him. He'd faced these situations before, at upscale restaurants with his mother, in luxury stores, even at school events when meeting parents of his classmates. The immediate assumption that he didn't belong, that his presence required explanation. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Never let them see you lose your cool. Your dignity is non-negotiable, but your reaction is your choice. Taking a deep breath, Jamal made his choice. Fine, he said quietly. I'll sit somewhere else. Heather's relief was visible. Thank you for understanding. Let's find you a seat in economy. As Jamal turned to follow her, Maxwell reorganized his belongings to fully claim both first-class seats, not bothering to hide his satisfied expression. What neither of them realized was that Jamal Johnson never truly conceded a fight. He just changed battlefields. Jamal followed Heather Wallace to the back of the plane, acutely aware of the curious glances from other passengers as he passed. Some looked sympathetic, others indifferent, a few smug, as if witnessing the natural order being restored. The economy section was already crowded, the overhead bins nearly full. Heather scanned the cabin with practiced efficiency. Let's see what we have available, she said, her tone suggesting she was doing him a special favor. Ah, here we go, 22E. Jamal glanced at the seat she indicated. It was a middle seat in the last row, directly in front of the lavatory, wedged between two significantly larger passengers who had already claimed both armrests. This is the only seat left, he asked quietly. I'm afraid so, Heather replied with manufactured regret. The flight is completely full today. Jamal nodded silently and squeezed past the passenger in the aisle seat, who barely shifted to allow him through. As he settled into the cramped middle seat, he noticed Heather already walking back toward first class, the matter resolved in her mind. The passenger to his right, a heavy-set man in his 40s, gave him a cursory nod before returning to his sports magazine. The woman on his left was already drifting to sleep against the window. At least he wouldn't have to make uncomfortable small talk. Once Heather was out of sight, Jamal discreetly removed his phone from his pocket. Though the announcement to put devices in airplane mode had been made, the doors were still open, and the plane remained at the gate. He had a few minutes. As his seatmates focused elsewhere, Jamal opened his messaging app and composed several texts in quick succession. The first went to Tyler Brooks, his executive assistant, on Aero Global Flight 1382 from ORD to San Francisco Airport. Seat issue. Need immediate intervention. Code Bluebird. The second went to Patricia Martinez, Aero Global's chief of operations, whom he had met during the acquisition negotiations. Patricia, Jamal Johnson here. Currently on Flight 1382. Experiencing concerning service issues. Require immediate attention. Will explain later. The third went to his legal counsel, document this incident. Flight 1382. May need follow-up. As Jamal sent the messages, his mind drifted back to a conversation with his mother from years earlier, when he'd come home upset after being followed by security at an electronics store. Why do they always assume I'm going to steal something? 12-year-old Jamal had asked, fighting back tears of frustration. Keisha had set aside the nursing textbook she'd been studying and taken his hands in hers. Because some people can't see past their own assumptions, she'd explained gently. They've been taught to fear what they don't understand. It's not fair, Jamal had protested. No, it's not, she agreed. But you have choices in how you respond. You can let their ignorance make you bitter, or you can use it as fuel to rise so high they can't ignore your brilliance. She'd squeezed his hands. And remember this, your success will be your loudest statement. One day, you'll walk into that same store and buy it if you want to. At the time, it had seemed like motherly hyperbole. Now, as the owner of an airline worth billions, her words carried new meaning. Jamal slipped his phone back into his pocket and gazed out the small portion of window he could see past his sleeping neighbor. On the tarmac below, he noticed unusual activity. Ground crew members who had been preparing for pushback were suddenly checking their tablets with confused expressions. Two supervisors huddled in conversation, repeatedly glancing toward the aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Captain Lawrence Bennett was reviewing his final pre-flight checklist when his communications system chimed with an urgent message. Aeroglobal 1382, this is operations. Hold your position at gate. Do not initiate pushback. Repeat, maintain position at gate until further instruction. Bennett frowned and exchanged a puzzled look with his first officer. Operations, this is Aeroglobal 1382. Confirm holding at gate. May I ask the reason for the delay? There was a brief pause before the response came. Stand by for further information. Priority directive from executive level. In the cabin, passengers began to notice the delay. The expected pushback time had come and gone. People checked watches and flight apps on their phones. The usual background hum of conversation gradually shifted in tone as confusion and mild irritation set in. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The cabin intercom crackled to life with Heather's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're experiencing some technical issues that our team is working to resolve. We expect to be underway shortly and appreciate your patience. Near the front of the plane, Maxwell Whitfield checked his watch impatiently and signaled for Heather's attention. What's the holdup? He demanded. I have a meeting in San Francisco this evening. Just a minor technical issue, sir, Heather assured him with the practiced smile reserved for first-class passengers. Nothing to worry about. Can I get you another champagne while we wait? Neither of them noticed the unusual activity now taking place at the jet bridge. 3 individuals in business attire had arrived at the gate, engaged in intense conversation with the gate agents. One of them was speaking urgently into a phone. All 3 looked unusually serious. Back in seat 22E, Jamal sat quietly, hands folded in his lap. Unlike the increasingly restless passengers around him, he showed no signs of impatience or concern. Instead, there was something else in his expression. The calm certainty of someone who knows exactly what's happening and what will happen next. 20 minutes after the unexpected delay began, the aircraft door, which had been closed for departure, reopened with a hydraulic hiss. The game had changed. And now, it would play by different rules altogether. The cabin fell silent as 3 airline officials in tailored business suits boarded the plane. Their expressions were serious, their movements purposeful. This wasn't a routine delay. Leading the group was a tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair who radiated authority. Benjamin Carter, Aeroglobal's regional director, surveyed the cabin with a tight expression before whispering something to his colleagues. They nodded in unison, their faces grave. Benjamin approached Heather Wallace, who had been reassuring an irritated passenger about the delay. Her professional smile faltered as he leaned in and spoke quietly but firmly into her ear. The transformation in her demeanor was immediate and striking. Her face drained of color. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes widened in unmistakable alarm. Where is he? Benjamin asked, his voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Heather's lips trembled slightly as she replied, in economy. 22E. Benjamin's jaw tightened visibly. You put him in 22E? a middle seat in the last row. Throughout the cabin, passengers were now openly watching the scene unfolding. Phones discreetly emerged from pockets and purses as people sensed something significant was transpiring. Benjamin and one colleague made their way toward Maxwell Whitfield, who was working on his laptop, oblivious to the sudden tension. The third official moved purposefully toward the back of the aircraft. "Excuse me, sir," Benjamin addressed Maxwell with cool professionalism. "There seems to be a seating issue that requires immediate resolution." Maxwell barely looked up. "I've already settled this with the flight attendant." There was a confused young man who... "Sir," Benjamin interrupted firmly, "I need to see your boarding pass." Something in his tone made Maxwell pause. He reluctantly produced his ticket from his jacket pocket. Benjamin examined it briefly. "Sir, your assigned seat is 2C. You're currently sitting in 2A. Maxwell's expression hardened. "Look, it's not a big deal." The kid didn't mind moving. "We've already delayed the flight over this nonsense." "Actually, sir, it is a very big deal," Benjamin replied, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cabin. "And the delay is entirely due to this situation." Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, the third airline official had reached row 22. She leaned down toward Jamal, who looked up calmly from his cramped middle seat. "Mr. Johnson?" she inquired softly. "I'm Amanda Reyes, Customer Relations Director. Would you please come with me?" Jamal nodded and carefully extracted himself from between his seatmates, who watched with undisguised curiosity. As Jamal followed Amanda up the aisle, murmurs rippled through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks, trying to understand what was happening. Who was this teenager suddenly receiving VIP treatment? When they reached the front of the aircraft, Benjamin Carter approached Jamal with an expression of profound respect tinged with embarrassment. "Mr. Johnson, on behalf of Aero Global Airlines, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for this unfortunate incident. Your seat will be restored to you immediately." By now, Maxwell had risen from seat 2A, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "What is going on here? Who is this kid?" Benjamin fixed him with a stern look. "This kid, as you call him, is Jamal Johnson. He is a VIP passenger who deserves our utmost respect." Throughout the cabin, the revelation landed with varying degrees of impact. Some passengers looked confused, others intrigued. A few began typing frantically on their phones, searching for information. Heather Wallace stood nearby, her professional composure completely abandoned as the gravity of her error became increasingly apparent. As Jamal stood quietly at the front of the plane, memories flashed through his mind: the security guard who had followed him through a department store when he was 12, the restaurant host who had asked if he was with the group over there when he'd arrived early for his mother's birthday dinner, the teacher who had accused him of cheating because his code was too advanced to be his own work. What do you think about how Jamal has been treated so far? Comment number 1 if you believe Maxwell should be removed from the flight immediately. Comment number 2 if you think Heather deserves to lose her job over this incident. Hit that like button if you've ever been underestimated or discriminated against, and subscribe to see more stories of justice being served. But what happens next might surprise you. How would you react if you were in Jamal's position? Would you demand justice, or would you choose mercy? And what about the other passengers watching this unfold? Whose side will they take when they learn the full truth? Stay tuned to find out as this story takes an unexpected turn. Maxwell Whitfield's face contorted with indignation as he looked from Benjamin Carter to Jamal and back again. The first-class cabin had gone completely silent, every passenger transfixed by the unfolding drama. "I don't care if he's a VIP or whatever," Maxwell snapped, making air quotes with his fingers. "This is ridiculous. The flight's already been delayed 20 minutes over a simple seating mix-up." Benjamin's professional demeanor didn't waver, but his voice took on an edge of steel. "Sir, you deliberately took a seat that wasn't assigned to you, then refused to move when the rightful passenger pointed out your error. He's a teenager." Maxwell countered, gesturing dismissively at Jamal. "I assumed there was a mistake. Why would a kid be flying first class alone anyway?" A murmur of disapproval rippled through the nearby passengers. Even those who might have shared Maxwell's initial assumptions were now uncomfortable with his openly dismissive attitude. Benjamin Carter exchanged a meaningful glance with his colleagues before making a decision. He turned to address the increasingly restless cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We're resolving a seating issue. Thank you for your patience." Then, lowering his voice for Maxwell alone, he delivered the bombshell. "Sir, perhaps you're unaware, but Mr. Johnson isn't just a VIP passenger. He's a major stakeholder in Aero Global Airlines." Maxwell's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. "That's absurd," he scoffed, loud enough for others to hear. "He's what, 15? You expect me to believe he owns part of an airline?" At that precise moment, a passenger in row 3 gasped audibly. She was staring at her phone screen, eyes wide. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, looking up at Jamal with newfound recognition. "You're that Jamal Johnson, the tech prodigy who sold his company for billions." The passenger turned her phone to show her seatmate, and within seconds, others were frantically searching on their devices. The atmosphere in the cabin transformed as recognition rippled through the space like an electric current. "He developed that AI system that revolutionized flight logistics," someone explained loudly from a few rows back. "He's the youngest billionaire in America," another voice added. As if a dam had broken, phones emerged throughout the cabin, recording the confrontation. Maxwell's face, previously flushed with indignation, now drained of color as he realized his predicament. From his position at the front of the cabin, Jamal watched silently as his carefully constructed privacy collapsed in real time. For years, he had managed to keep his professional achievements separate from his personal life. That barrier was now irreparably breached. "I didn't. I wasn't aware." Maxwell stammered, suddenly realizing he was being recorded by multiple passengers. Social media was already ablaze. A passenger had live-tweeted the confrontation with the hashtag airline drama, which was rapidly evolving into hashtag Black Billionaire Disrespected and hashtag See Justice as the context became clear. At Travel Truth, witnessing racial profiling in real time on hashtag Aero Global Flight. White businessmen took black teen's first-class seat, flight attendant sided with wrong person. Plot twist, teen OWNS part of the airline. Hashtag See Justice. At Business Insider, is that tech wunderkind Jamal Johnson being denied his rightful seat? His AI company SkyLogic was acquired by Aero Global last year for $3.2 billion. Developing story. Hashtag airline scandal. Within minutes, major news outlets were picking up the story. The teenager who had revolutionized airline logistics with his AI algorithm, the same teen who had quietly become one of the youngest billionaires in history, had been dismissed, disbelieved, and displaced on his own airline. In Aero Global's corporate headquarters, crisis management teams were being rapidly assembled as executives watched the viral explosion with horror. The company's stock price had already dipped 3% in just 15 minutes. Jamal's phone vibrated continuously with incoming messages. From Tyler Brooks, social media explosion underway. Crisis team activated. How do you want to handle this? From his mother, baby, are you okay? It's all over the news. Call me. From his PR director, need your input ASAP. Press requests flooding in. Statement needed. Maxwell, now fully aware of the catastrophic error he'd made, attempted to backpedal. There's clearly been a misunderstanding, he said, forcing a conciliatory smile. If I had known who you were. That's exactly the problem, isn't it? Jamal finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. The seat belonged to me regardless of who I am. The simple truth of this statement hung in the air, damning in its simplicity. Several passengers nodded in agreement, and someone in the back of the cabin actually applauded. Benjamin Carter cleared his throat. Mr. Whitfield, we'll need you to gather your belongings and move to your assigned seat. Immediately. Or what? Maxwell challenged, though his bravado was clearly faltering. Or you can deplane and take a later flight, Benjamin replied evenly. Your choice. While this confrontation continued, Jamal's mind flashed back to the acquisition meeting 6 months earlier. He had specifically requested that his ownership stake remain confidential, wanting to maintain his normal teenage life while still guiding the company's technological transformation. We'll keep your involvement strictly need to know, CEO Thomas Reynolds had assured him. Board members and key executives only. That privacy was now shattered. As Jamal watched videos of himself spreading across the internet in real time, he realized his life would never be the same. The aircraft's phone rang, and a flight attendant answered it, then approached Benjamin with wide eyes. Sir, it's CEO Reynolds. For Mr. Johnson. Benjamin handed the phone to Jamal, who stepped aside to take the call. Jamal, I just heard what's happening, Thomas Reynolds said, his voice tense. This is an absolute disaster. Tell me how you want to handle it. Jamal considered for a moment, watching as Maxwell continued arguing with the airline officials. Heather Wallace stood nearby, her face ashen as she realized the full implications of her actions. I want this resolved quickly so everyone can get to their destinations, Jamal said calmly. But I also want accountability. This isn't just about me. Anything you need, Reynolds promised. I'm boarding a corporate jet right now to meet you in San Francisco. And for what it's worth, I'm deeply sorry this happened. As Jamal ended the call, he noticed that nearly every passenger was now watching him, many openly recording. His dual life, normal teenager and business prodigy, had collided spectacularly, and there was no going back. The revelation that had begun as a whisper was now a roar, echoing far beyond the confines of the aircraft. And still, the plane remained firmly on the ground, a metal tube transformed into an arena where issues of respect, assumption, and privilege were playing out for a global audience to witness. The standoff in first class continued for several tense minutes. Maxwell Whitfield, now perspiring visibly in his expensive suit, refused to move to his assigned seat, instead demanding to speak with someone in actual authority. Benjamin Carter's patience was visibly wearing thin. Sir, I am the Regional Director of Operations for AeroGlobal Airlines. I assure you, there is no higher authority available on this aircraft. As if on cue, the aircraft door reopened. A distinguished man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and an impeccably tailored suit stepped aboard. The airline employees immediately straightened their posture in recognition. Actually, Benjamin corrected himself, I stand corrected. Thomas Reynolds, CEO of AeroGlobal Airlines, had apparently abandoned his plan to meet Jamal in San Francisco, choosing instead to handle the situation personally and immediately. His expression was grave as he surveyed the scene. Mr. Reynolds, Benjamin began, we were just. Reynolds held up a hand, silencing him, then walked directly to Jamal. Mr. Johnson, my sincere apologies for this situation. He extended his hand, which Jamal shook firmly. The entire cabin watched in fascination as the CEO of a major airline showed such deference to a 15-year-old boy. Those who hadn't yet realized Jamal's importance were now frantically searching their phones for information. Reynolds then turned to Maxwell, his expression cooling considerably. Mr. Whitfield, is it? I understand you're in the wrong seat and have refused multiple requests to move. Maxwell's demeanor changed instantly in the presence of someone he recognized as a peer in the business world. Thomas Reynolds. I didn't realize you personally handled seating disputes, he attempted to joke, extending his hand. Reynolds ignored the offered handshake. I personally handle situations where valued members of the AeroGlobal family are disrespected on my aircraft. Look, this has all been blown out of proportion, Maxwell protested, lowering his voice. If someone had just explained who the boy was. His name is Mr. Johnson, Reynolds corrected sharply, and his seat assignment should have been respected regardless of his identity or age. He turned to Heather Wallace, who seemed to be trying to make herself invisible. As should have been clear to all our staff. Heather's face crumpled. Sir, We'll discuss this later, Reynolds cut her off, then addressed Maxwell again. Mr. Whitfield, you have two options. Move to your assigned seat, or deplane immediately. Those are your only choices. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that Maxwell finally recognized his defeat. Without another word, he gathered his belongings and moved to seat 2C, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Jamal. Reynolds then addressed Heather and another flight attendant. Ms. Wallace, you and Mr. Whitfield will deplane now. Your services won't be required for this flight. Heather's eyes widened in shock. Sir, please. This is not a discussion, Reynolds stated firmly. We'll address this situation more thoroughly upon your return to headquarters. As Heather collected her personal items, visibly fighting back tears, Reynolds turned to the remaining cabin crew. Please prepare for immediate departure once Mr. Whitfield and Ms. Wallace have deplaned. Passengers have been delayed long enough. The entire exchange was captured on dozens of phones, instantly feeding the social media frenzy. Hashtags continued to trend as the story spread globally with remarkable speed. Reynolds approached Jamal again, speaking quietly. I've arranged for the pilot's rest cabin to be prepared for you. It's private and comfortable. Thank you, but that won't be necessary, Jamal replied, his voice steady. I'd just like my original seat, please. Reynolds nodded respectfully at the teenager's decision. Of course. As Maxwell and Heather were escorted from the plane, the mood in the cabin transformed. Passengers who had been irritated by the delay now buzzed with excitement at having witnessed such drama. Many were openly discussing Jamal's accomplishments, having researched him during the confrontation. When Jamal finally took his rightful seat in 2A, a ripple of spontaneous applause broke out. Embarrassed by the attention, he simply nodded acknowledgement and settled in, immediately putting on headphones as a signal that he preferred privacy. Not everyone respected this boundary. A young black girl, perhaps 12 years old, hesitantly approached from a few rows back. Excuse me, she said shyly when Jamal noticed her and removed one earphone. I just wanted to say you're my hero. I'm learning to code too. Jamal's expression softened immediately. What language are you starting with? Python, she replied with growing confidence. I'm building a program to help my mom keep track of her nursing schedule. That's exactly how I started, Jamal told her with a genuine smile. Keep going. The world needs your ideas. As the girl returned to her seat, clutching an autograph and beaming, Jamal felt the weight of responsibility that came with his newly public status. Until today, he'd been able to control his narrative, to separate his business achievements from his personal life. Now, he'd inadvertently become a symbol, not just of success, but of dignity in the face of discrimination. The flight finally took off nearly an hour behind schedule. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds, the atmosphere in the cabin had completely transformed. Flight attendants who had barely noticed Jamal during boarding now approached with deferential offers of service. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation gave him respectful nods or curious glances. In seat 3B, directly behind Jamal, a white businessman in his 40s leaned forward. I just want to apologize, he said quietly. I saw what happened and said nothing. That was wrong. Jamal considered this for a moment before responding. Thank you for saying that. As the flight reached cruising altitude, Jamal gazed out the window at the patchwork landscape below. He thought about his mother's words from years ago, about how success would be his loudest statement. She had been right, but he hadn't anticipated how public that statement would become. He took out his phone and opened the secure messaging app he used to communicate with his mother. I'm okay, he texted her. We'll call when I land. Things are going to be different now. Her response came quickly, you handled it with grace, just like I taught you. I'm proud of the man you're becoming. Different doesn't mean worse. Jamal smiled at her words, then switched to his email to review his presentation for tomorrow. The conference organizers had originally scheduled him for a small breakout session. Now, he suspected, they might be reconsidering that decision. As the plane continued its journey westward, the young billionaire settled into his rightful seat, facing a future that had irrevocably changed in the span of a single hour. The power had shifted, not just on this flight, but in Jamal's carefully balanced life. What remained to be seen was what he would do with that power now that his voice had been amplified for the whole world to hear. At 37,000 feet somewhere over Nebraska, Aeroglobal Flight 1382 continued its journey to San Francisco, but the story of what had transpired on board was traveling much faster than the aircraft itself. Within the plane's cabin, an uneasy calm had settled. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with professional efficiency, though they now approached Jamal with a noticeable mix of deference and anxiety. Passengers occasionally snuck glances at the teenage billionaire, some openly taking photos when they thought he wouldn't notice. Jamal had switched his phone to airplane mode after takeoff, temporarily disconnecting from the digital storm. But when the aircraft's Wi-Fi service activated, his devices immediately began vibrating with an onslaught of notifications. His executive assistant, Tyler Brooks, had sent him a detailed brief on the situation. Media coverage extensive and growing. All major networks running the story. Social media engagement unprecedented. Hashtag Seat Justice trending #1 globally. Hashtag Black Excellence and hashtag Aeroglobal Shame also trending. PR team awaiting your guidance on official statement. Attached was a document with sample headlines. Teen billionaire displaced from first-class seat in apparent racial profiling incident. Airline owned by black teen grounds flight after he's denied seat. Viral video, watch the moment airline staff realize they've disrespected their boss. Maxwell Whitfield, executive who took black teen seat identified as Bridgewater Capital SVP. Jamal scrolled through the brief with growing concern. He had never sought public attention, preferring to focus on his work rather than his identity or age. Now, that choice had been taken from him. "This is not how I wanted this to go," he texted Tyler. "I know," came the immediate reply. "But we can manage this. The public response is overwhelmingly supportive of you. This could be an opportunity to address larger issues." Jamal considered this perspective. If his privacy had to be sacrificed, perhaps the attention could be directed towards something meaningful. Elsewhere on social media, the debate was raging. While most commenters expressed outrage at how Jamal had been treated, there was also a vocal minority questioning whether his response had been excessive. Did he really need to ground an entire plane full of people just because someone took his seat? "Seems like an abuse of power to me." Hashtag privileged billionaire, one tweet read. "Maybe if he dressed like he could afford first class, this wouldn't have happened. Just saying." Hashtag common sense, wrote another. These dissenting views were quickly drowned out by defenders. If you're asking why a black kid had to ground a plane instead of asking why a white man felt entitled to steal his seat and a flight attendant backed him up without checking, you're part of the problem. Hashtag seat justice. The story had transcended a simple seating dispute, becoming a lightning rod for discussions about race, age discrimination, and power dynamics in America. Meanwhile, the identification of Maxwell Whitfield as a senior vice president at Bridgewater Capital had sparked calls for his termination. The investment firm's social media accounts were flooded with demands for them to address the incident. At 2:17 p.m., Bridgewater Capital released a statement. "We are aware of the incident involving our employee Maxwell Whitfield. We take these matters very seriously and are conducting an internal investigation. Mr. Whitfield has been placed on administrative leave pending the results of this investigation." Similarly, Aeroglobal Airlines issued their own statement. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred on Flight 1382. The actions witnessed do not reflect our company values or service standards. We have initiated a comprehensive review of our training protocols and are taking immediate steps to address this situation. The employee involved has been suspended pending investigation." The statement notably avoided mentioning Jamal's connection to the company, respecting at least that aspect of his privacy. 30 minutes into the flight, a young mother approached Jamal's seat with hesitation, her daughter hiding shyly behind her. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said quietly. "My daughter just wanted to say hello. You've been her inspiration since she read about your AI work in her school's technology club." Jamal smiled and spent a few minutes chatting with the girl about her interest in programming, giving her advice on resources for young coders. As they returned to their seats, he noticed several passengers recording the interaction. By the time he checked his messages again, clips of this moment had already gone viral, with commenters praising his generosity with the young fan despite his difficult day. "This kid has more grace and maturity than most adults." #Jamal Johnson #role model, read one particularly popular post. Jamal put his phone down and gazed out the window, feeling the weight of his new reality. His mother had always warned him that extraordinary success would eventually bring extraordinary scrutiny. When that day comes, she told him, make sure they see the real you, not just what they expect to see. At that moment, his phone lit up with an incoming video call from Keisha Johnson. Jamal hesitated only briefly before accepting. His mother's concerned face appeared on screen. "Baby, are you okay? I've been watching the news." "I'm fine, Mom," Jamal assured her, keeping his voice low. "Just, dealing with it." Keisha studied her son's face carefully. "You handled yourself with dignity. I'm proud of you for that." "I didn't mean for all this to happen," Jamal admitted. "I just wanted my seat." "I know. But sometimes these moments choose us, not the other way around." She paused, then added, "Remember what we've always talked about, use your position to make things better, not just for yourself but for others who might not have your platform." "That's what I'm trying to figure out now," Jamal replied. "How to turn this into something positive." As they continued their conversation, Jamal's PR director sent a draft statement for his approval. It was professionally crafted, expressing disappointment about the incident while emphasizing Aero Global's commitment to treating all passengers with respect. Jamal read it twice, then began typing a different response, one that spoke not just to this incident but to the larger issues it represented. He would address the situation directly during his presentation tomorrow, speaking from his own experience rather than through corporate language. Meanwhile, fresh news alerts informed him that Heather Wallace had released a tearful video apology on her personal social media accounts. "I made assumptions based on appearance, and I was wrong," she stated. "I failed in my duty to treat all passengers with equal respect, and I am deeply sorry for the hurt I caused. I've asked to participate in bias training programs and hope to learn from this experience." By mid-flight, the story had evolved beyond the individuals involved to spark broader conversations about implicit bias, corporate responsibility, and the experiences of young people of color in predominantly white spaces. Major news networks were already arranging panels to discuss the incident. Civil rights leaders had issued statements. Competing airlines were publicly reaffirming their commitment to unbiased service. A cascade of consequences from one stolen seat. As the captain announced they were beginning their descent into San Francisco, Jamal closed his eyes briefly, gathering his thoughts. When he opened them, he noticed that Aero Global's in-flight magazine in the seat pocket featured an article about the company's technological transformation, work he had spearheaded but for which others had been the public face. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to step into the light and use his voice. Not just as the hidden genius behind the technology, but as a young black man navigating spaces not designed with him in mind. The wheels of the aircraft touched down on San Francisco International Airport's runway at exactly 4:18 p.m. local time. As the plane taxied to the gate, Jamal could see unusual activity through his window, news vans with satellite dishes, airport security creating a perimeter, and what appeared to be a swarm of reporters and photographers. The media firestorm had manifested physically, waiting to engulf him the moment he stepped off the plane. There would be no quiet exit, no anonymous ride to his hotel. The transformation of his life was complete. Jamal took a deep breath and prepared to face his new reality. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom as the aircraft completed its taxi to the gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport. Local time is 4:22 p.m. with clear skies and a temperature of 68 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we've parked at the gate and the fasten seatbelt sign has been turned off." After a brief pause, he continued, "We've been informed there is significant media presence in the terminal. Passengers who wish to avoid this may request escort assistance from our ground staff." Jamal gazed out his window at the gathering crowd beyond the glass walls of the terminal. News cameras, photographers, and reporters with microphones stood ready, their attention focused on the arriving aircraft. This wasn't the anonymous arrival he had planned. His phone vibrated with a message from Tyler, "Security team in place. Private exit arranged through staff area. Car waiting at service entrance." A flight attendant approached his seat as the plane completed its docking procedure. "Mr. Johnson," she said quietly, "we have a representative from airport operations waiting to escort you through a private exit." Jamal nodded his appreciation. "Thank you." As other passengers gathered their belongings, many cast curious glances his way, some openly taking final photos or videos. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Jamal remained seated, allowing others to deplane first. A distinguished woman in an airport operations uniform approached. "Mr. Johnson. I'm Sofia Ramirez, head of VIP services. If you'll follow me, we have a secure route prepared." Jamal followed her through the empty first-class cabin to the forward door, where they exited not into the jetway but onto a staircase that led directly to the tarmac. A black SUV with tinted windows waited below. "Is this necessary?" Jamal asked, momentarily overwhelmed by the security measures. "I'm afraid so," Sophia replied. "The terminal is quite chaotic. Several news crews attempted to bypass security checkpoints. We thought this would be less stressful for you." As they drove across the airfield, Jamal glimpsed the regular terminal exit where passengers from his flight were emerging to flashbulbs and shouted questions. He felt a pang of guilt at having unintentionally caused such disruption. The SUV delivered him to a private entrance of the Moscone Convention Center, where the Tech Future conference was already underway. Tyler Brooks waited inside, tablet in hand, his usually calm demeanor slightly frayed. "Quite a day," Tyler said, attempting levity as they shook hands. In his mid-20s, Tyler had been one of Jamal's first hires, one of the few adults who had taken the then 13-year-old entrepreneur seriously from the beginning. "That's one way to put it," Jamal replied. "What's the situation here?" "Your session has been upgraded from breakout room C to the main stage," Tyler explained as they walked through a service corridor. "Attendance request has jumped from approximately 80 people to, well, capacity is 2,500. Jamal stopped walking. "You're kidding." "I wish I were." The conference organizers called it an unprecedented interest surge. "Your slot has been extended from 30 minutes to a full hour." Tyler hesitated before adding, "They're asking if you'd be willing to address the incident directly." Jamal resumed walking, processing this information. "Do I have a choice?" "You always have choices," Tyler replied firmly. "We can cancel. We can stick to the original presentation on AI applications. Or we can use this platform. It's entirely up to you." They reached the green room where Jamal had time to refresh and prepare. On a monitor, he could see the main stage where a panel discussion was currently underway. The room beyond was packed. After a moment of reflection, Jamal made his decision. Update the presentation. Keep the technical content but add context. I want to address what happened, but I don't want it to overshadow why we're here. Tyler nodded and set to work. An hour later, Jamal stood in the wings of the main stage as the conference moderator introduced him. Our next speaker needs little introduction, especially after today's events that have captured global attention. At 15, he's revolutionized airline logistics, founded a company acquired for billions, and become an unexpected symbol of resilience and dignity. Please welcome Jamal Johnson. The audience rose in a standing ovation before Jamal had spoken a single word. Camera flashes popped throughout the massive hall. He walked to center stage, waited for the applause to subside, and took a deep breath. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady. "I came here to talk about artificial intelligence and the future of transportation. And we will get to that. But first, I think I should address what many of you have seen online today." For the next 15 minutes, Jamal recounted the incident honestly but without sensationalism. He spoke about the assumptions that had led to his displacement, the decision to assert his rights, and the unexpected global reaction. "What happened today wasn't unique," he explained. "It wasn't even the most egregious example of bias I've experienced. It was just the first time I had the platform for people to notice." He paused, looking out at the sea of attentive faces. "The issue isn't about a first-class seat. It's about who we assume belongs in certain spaces and who we assume doesn't. It's about whose word we take at face value and whose we question. These small moments happen countless times every day to people who don't have the means to make headlines." Jamal then seamlessly transitioned to his prepared remarks about AI applications in transportation, but now framed within a larger context of creating systems that serve everyone equally, that recognize and correct for human biases rather than amplifying them. The audience listened with rapt attention, and when he concluded, they once again rose to their feet in applause that continued for several minutes. Meanwhile, across the country, the aftermath continued to unfold. Maxwell Whitfield released a statement through his attorney: "I sincerely apologize to Mr. Johnson for my behavior. My actions were inappropriate and reflected biases I wasn't fully aware of until now. I am committed to learning from this experience and making meaningful changes." Despite this apology, Bridgewater Capital announced his termination that evening, citing violations of their code of conduct and damage to their corporate reputation. Heather Wallace faced a different fate. After her public apology and pledge to improve, Aero Global announced she would be suspended rather than terminated, on the condition that she complete comprehensive bias training and participate in the company's new Passenger Respect initiative. Most surprisingly, by that evening, Aero Global had unveiled a new Passenger Bill of Rights that would be displayed at every gate and on every flight. The first point read, "All passengers deserve equal respect and fair treatment regardless of age, race, gender, or appearance. Every ticketed passenger has the right to their assigned seat without justification or questioning." Social media dubbed it the Jamal Johnson Rule. As Jamal completed a series of interviews following his presentation, one reporter asked if he felt justice had been served. "This isn't about punishment," Jamal replied thoughtfully. "It's about awareness and change. If this incident helps one person examine their assumptions or one company improve their training, then something positive has come from it." Later that evening, alone in his hotel room, Jamal video called his mother again. "You've handled this better than most adults would," Keisha told him, pride evident in her voice. "How are you really feeling?" Jamal considered the question carefully. "Overwhelmed. Exposed. But also, purposeful. Like maybe this happened for a reason. Every challenge is an opportunity," she reminded him, echoing what she'd taught him since childhood. "I know," Jamal agreed. "And I think I know what I want to do next." As he drifted to sleep that night, Jamal's mind was already formulating plans that would extend far beyond algorithms and applications, plans that would use his unexpected platform to address the systemic issues his personal experience had highlighted on a global stage. The incident had begun with a stolen seat, but its resolution would ultimately create space for many others who had long been told, in ways both subtle and overt, that they didn't belong. 6 months after the incident that catapulted him into the global spotlight, Jamal Johnson stood at a podium in a renovated community center in South Chicago. Behind him, a sleek sign read, "Johnson Innovation Foundation," with the tagline, "Opening Doors, Creating Opportunities." The room buzzed with energy as over 200 middle and high school students, primarily from underserved communities, waited eagerly for the official launch of the Foundation's first initiative, a comprehensive technology training program with guaranteed internship placements at major tech companies. "Welcome, future innovators," Jamal began, his confidence having grown noticeably over the past months of public speaking. No longer the reluctant public figure, he had embraced his platform with purpose and vision. "6 months ago, I experienced something that many of you might find familiar, being judged not by my abilities or my ticket, but by assumptions based on how I looked and my age. What made my story different wasn't the incident itself, it was that people paid attention." Cameras from major networks captured his speech as he continued, "This foundation isn't about me. It's about making sure that when you create the next breakthrough algorithm, design the next revolutionary application, or develop the next world-changing technology, doors won't be closed to you because of who you are or where you come from." In the months following the airline incident, Jamal had leveraged his heightened profile to launch several initiatives. The foundation, funded with $50 million from his personal fortune, focused on supporting young minorities in technology through education, mentorship, and access to capital. His mother, Keisha Johnson, had left her nursing position to serve as the foundation's executive director, bringing her practical wisdom and community connections to the organization. She beamed with pride from the front row as her son addressed the audience. Beyond the foundation, Jamal had become a powerful voice on issues of systemic bias in technology and business. His TED Talk, titled "Everyday Indignities: How Small Moments of Bias Shape Our World," had garnered over 15 million views. Major universities had invited him to speak, and legislative committees had sought his testimony on algorithmic bias and technology access. Aero Global Airlines, meanwhile, had undergone its own transformation. The company had implemented comprehensive bias training for all customer-facing staff, revised its conflict resolution protocols, and established an independent review board to address passenger complaints. The Passenger Bill of Rights had been adopted by several other airlines, creating a new industry standard. And perhaps most surprisingly, Heather Wallace, the flight attendant who had initially dismissed Jamal, had become an unlikely advocate for change. After completing her required training, she had requested to remain involved in the company's ongoing bias awareness programs, sharing her experience as a cautionary tale that helped other employees recognize their own blind spots. "I never saw myself as someone who would discriminate," she explained in an internal training video that later became public. "But that day, I made split-second judgments based on appearance rather than facts. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from that mistake and help others avoid making similar ones." As Jamal concluded the foundation launch speech and the students broke into small groups for workshop sessions, his assistant informed him that someone unexpected was waiting to speak with him. In a quiet office adjacent to the main space, Maxwell Whitfield sat nervously. The former investment banker looked different than he had 6 months earlier, humbler, less polished, visibly uncomfortable. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Maxwell began as Jamal entered and closed the door behind him. "I was surprised by your request," Jamal replied neutrally, taking a seat across from him. Maxwell nodded. "I imagine so." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to apologize to you personally, not through lawyers or press statements. What I did was wrong, and the way I spoke to you was inexcusable." "I appreciate that," Jamal said. "What have you been doing since then?" Maxwell's expression shifted. "After I was terminated, I had a lot of time to reflect. It was educational to suddenly be the person people didn't want in their space." He shook his head ruefully. "I deserved it, but it was still a wake-up call." He continued, "For the past 3 months, I've been volunteering with an organization that works with minority entrepreneurs. I've been helping with business plans, financial modeling, using my skills in a way that might actually make a positive difference." Jamal studied him thoughtfully. "That sounds meaningful." "It has been," Maxwell confirmed. "More than anything I did in 20 years of banking." He hesitated before adding, "I'm not here asking for forgiveness or trying to rehabilitate my image. I just wanted you to know that what happened changed my perspective permanently. You've handled everything with remarkable grace, especially considering how I treated you." Their conversation continued for nearly 30 minutes, evolving from awkward apology to a surprisingly thoughtful discussion about privilege, perception, and the possibility of genuine change. When they emerged, Maxwell asked if he could observe one of the workshop sessions. Jamal agreed, and the former executive sat quietly in the back of a room where teenagers were learning about algorithmic design, the very field that had launched Jamal's success. Later that evening, after the launch events had concluded, Jamal and his mother visited their old neighborhood. The modest house where they had lived during his early years had been transformed into a satellite location for the foundation, offering after-school coding programs for local children. "Did you ever imagine this?" Jamal asked as they stood in what had once been their living room, now filled with computers and learning materials. Keisha smiled, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "I always knew you would do extraordinary things. I just didn't know what form they would take." They walked through the neighborhood as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Neighbors waved and called out greetings, proud of their local hero but still treating him as the boy they had watched grow up. "That's what keeps you grounded," Keisha observed. "Here, you're still just Jamal from down the street, not Jamal Johnson the billionaire." The following morning, Jamal boarded another Aero Global flight, this time to a technology conference in Boston. Unlike 6 months earlier, there was no anonymity as he moved through the airport. Travelers recognized him, some requesting selfies or simply nodding respectfully as he passed. The airline staff treated him with professional courtesy, neither the excessive deference that had immediately followed the incident nor the dismissive assumption that had started it all. It was simply the respectful service every passenger deserved. As he settled into his first-class seat, Jamal noticed a young black boy, perhaps 10 or 11, being escorted to the seat across the aisle by a flight attendant who checked his ticket and welcomed him aboard with a warm smile. The boy caught Jamal's eye and grinned with recognition. Jamal returned the smile, then turned to gaze out the window as the aircraft prepared for departure. In the reflection of the plexiglass, he could see not just his own face but a glimpse of what his actions had helped create. A world where, perhaps, one more door had been opened, one more barrier removed, one more assumption challenged. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the clear blue sky, carrying with it a young man whose journey had evolved far beyond algorithms and applications to something more profound, the ongoing work of transforming moments of injustice into movements for change. #the lesson. Jamal's story teaches us that dignity isn't determined by wealth or status, but by how we respond to injustice. When faced with discrimination, he chose strategic action over emotional reaction, demonstrating that true power comes from self-control and calculated response. The incident reveals how quickly people's perceptions change when they discover someone's value, highlighting our society's superficial judgments based on appearance rather than character. This narrative also exposes how systemic bias operates through seemingly small interactions. A seat assignment, a dismissive glance, an unchecked assumption. These everyday indignities accumulate to form barriers that many face silently. Jamal's position allowed his experience to be amplified, but countless similar incidents go unnoticed and unaddressed. Perhaps most importantly, the story reminds us that meaningful change requires both accountability and transformation. Maxwell and Heather faced consequences but also opportunities for growth. Rather than seeking punishment alone, Jamal channeled his experience into creating pathways for others, understanding that true justice isn't about retribution but about building better systems for everyone. Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated or misjudged based on your appearance? Or perhaps you've realized you made unfair assumptions about someone else. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help others feel less alone in their struggles. If this account of fighting racism and discrimination resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and triumph. These narratives matter because they show us both the reality of prejudice and the possibility of progress. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for yourself with dignity is not just your right but your responsibility. Tag a friend who exemplifies grace under pressure. Thank you for joining our community that believes in confronting difficult truths with compassion and courage. Remember, change begins with awareness, continues with action, and is sustained through accountability. Until next time, keep claiming your rightful seat at the table.